Rain World is a unique, survival-focused video game with many secrets to be revealed. Secrets about the unfamiliar world you find yourself in, secrets about the ancient civilizations who built it and later abandoned it. These secrets are not revealed easily. Only through surviving the arduous trek through dangerous, unfamiliar lands can you get even a glimpse of concrete information, and more often than not, these glimpses feel like a speck of dust swirling through the boundless macrocosm of the world. Sometimes, though, what you find can reveal a bit more about the ancient civilizations of this world's past and the values they lived by. When you first begin your journey, you're greeted by a progressing score of sorts. Each day or cycle you survive, your score increases by 1 to a maximum of ordinarily 5. Each time you die, your score decreases to a minimum of 1. This score is known as your karma, and higher karma levels allow you to progress to new regions in the game. As you explore, you may see these karma symbols repeated, on background objects, when collecting achievements, or in holographic displays shown to you by strange creatures. If you wish to decipher the meanings behind these unfamiliar symbols, you must first ascend to the highest point you can reach, to the peak of a man-made mountain where a being of godlike status resides. Here, you'll find a set of 5 enormous art pieces, which depict in sequence what each symbol represents and showcase a wealth of artistic features, as well as providing clues to the ancient civilization of this world's past and the real-world inspiration for Rainworld's lore. These 5 pieces were created by the same people who created this world, known to us only as the Ancients. These pieces are incredibly similar in their design, with all of them sharing a great many stylistic elements. They're all quite large, estimated at 10 to 12 feet assuming the ancients were roughly human-sized, and square, painted or printed onto stone or metal plates suspended by mechanical tubing. All feature 1 or 2 large humanoid figures surrounded by an aureole or a sort of halo set atop a geometrically patterned background. These patterned backgrounds have influenced the Rainworld community, specifically the wiki, to call these pieces tapestries. The straight-edged, regular geometric designs are quite reminiscent of the weaving found in tapestries, where the warp and weft threads, vertical and horizontal respectively, encourage such patterns. However, the few articles of clothing we see bear none of this geometry. Unless these pattern textiles were embedded deep into the ancients' past, I would argue that the geometric designs are much more likely to be technological in origin. Circles and regular rounded lines feature heavily, with the design on the 5th piece being reminiscent of circuit board patterns. Therefore, I'm far more inclined to refer to these art pieces as plates, which is how the game's code refers to them, and how I'll be referring to them going forward. The geometric backgrounds on these plates consist of dull, neutral-toned colors, for the most part seeming to blend into the surfaces on which they appear, simply providing texture. They're formed by individual cells which are separated in offset rows or columns, sometimes diagonally. They assist somewhat in the action of the pieces, such as in the first plate, where the long, pointed cells angle to the bottom right, reinforcing the driving motion of the scene. Over these patterns, in a brighter hue or a complementary color to the background, is a circular halo called an aureole, which encircles the subject of the plates. These are reminiscent of the aureoles often depicted surrounding Buddhas, bodhisattvas, and other deities in Buddhist art. Other cultures and religions use similar styles, such as mandolas sometimes seen surrounding Jesus in Christian art. This could suggest that the figures depicted are deities or were of mythological status to the ancients. The figures on these plates form the main focus of the pieces. Each composition is evenly balanced within its frame, with even the more dynamic poses staying fairly symmetrical. The figures are depicted in active poses, but the style used to depict them is in some ways stiff. When depicted in profile, the figures' legs often overlap each other, such as in the first and second plates, where even in movement their legs seem to be bound together. There are no shadows depicted in any of these pieces either, giving them a very flat appearance which lacks any of the contours or depth which shadows show. Form is shown only with outlines and overlapping elements. This is contrasted by the otherwise naturalistic depiction of the figures. The fabric of their clothes drapes and folds in highly naturalistic ways, their bodies show the subtle curves of musculature, bones, and fat, and even the stranger elements such as the ornamentations and wires extending from their bodies appear to be rendered with a fair bit of naturalism. There may be some stylistic liberties taken, especially in depictions of hair and feet, but this is generally unclear and fairly speculative. The clearest element of stylization to these pieces is the flat, vibrant colors in which they're depicted. Vibrant green, red, and orange, and deep black serve as the main colors of the figures, while their bright gold masks serve as focal points, drawing the eye to the figures' lavish ornamentations. Each color is outlined in a darker shade, with the notable exception of the blue ornaments, possibly gemstones or small lights, in the 2nd, 4th, and 5th plates. These are colored a deep blue and outlined in cyan, which gives them a bright, glowing quality. The ancients themselves are depicted with colorful, sometimes perhaps patterned skin. There could be a few explanations for this, though any theory is mainly conjecture, since these are the best representations of ancients we see in the game. One option is that the ancients really were these bright colors, either naturally or through painting or tattooing these bright colors and patterns onto their skin. Given the game's Buddhist interpretation, and the visual similarities between these plates and Buddhist depictions of deities, however, it's equally likely that the skin colors were a stylistic or symbolic choice. Similar to depictions of the female Buddha green Tara, the plates may depict deities or mythological figures whose coloration can be altered as an aspect of the mythos. The final commonalities between these plates have to do with the culture and customs of the ancients themselves. The ancients believed that the path to ascension, or death without possibility of reincarnation, lay in distancing oneself from the material world and its natural urges. These natural urges are symbolized by what we have come to know as the karma symbols, and each of these plates depicts one of the 5 urges, with the symbol depicted centrally being worn or carried by a figure. Following the theory that these plates depict deities, it could be that the figure carrying each respective symbol is a deity representing that natural urge. This could make them akin to the demon princes in Christian mythology, tempting ancients to give in to their base urges and thus keeping them from ascension. They could also be depictions of famous individuals who embodied these base urges and later overcame them and ascended, thus their faces being painted over or bleached out, removing their identity from the depiction. While the masks themselves should have served this purpose, we're told that these ornate masks became a point of self-expression for the ancients. Painting over them crosses out even the manufactured identity and obfuscates the self even further. The first plate depicts 2 figures in profile facing each other. An ancient clothed in red looms over and stabs a spear down into the chest of a fallen ancient clothed in green. This scene is most commonly said to depict wrath, danger, or revenge. Another possible interpretation given to us by a character in the game named Pebbles is simply striving. As he describes it, "You are bound by the first urge. Your mind is fixated, striving towards a single goal, one from which you are unable to turn away from." However, the character he speaks to is fixated on revenge, and Pebbles is known to beat around the bush, so this could simply be a roundabout way of referring to wrath. The red ancient seems to be the one most directly embodying the urge. They wear the karma symbol, which is emblazoned on an ornamental disc seeming to fall from their shoulder. The disc hangs down into the center of the composition, and together with the diagonal geometry of the background, the motion of the scene seems to drive the red ancient through the wrath symbol to attack the green ancient. The red ancient's figure here is quite intriguing. Much of their upper body is obscured by their hanging ornamentations and the way their mask was painted over. Over their back is a strange item that appears to be attached to their mask. It appears that this item is intended to sit flush against their back when they stand, and in fact there seem to be rivets fastening it to their shoulders. It's unclear what purpose this serves, though given the tubes connected to the ancient's back and the disconnected tube-like structures hanging from the bottom of the item, it could serve as a way for the ancient to carry and consume food or water. A count from an ancient states that the society was dependent on 5 pebbles for water, nectar, energy, void fluid, and all other vital resources. This nectar, which was a beverage of some kind, seems to be put in the list in place of food, so perhaps it was a staple of an ancient's diet. It's very unclear what purpose these tubes could have served, and this is just the only theory that makes any sense to me. This ancient's clothing is also of note. Their shirt appears to have writing on the back. It's difficult to decipher, but it could be a circle with a horizontal bar through the center, sitting above another horizontal bar. A closed circle is often shown to represent peace and harmony in-game, such as in the monk achievement, which you obtain by not eating living creatures for a number of cycles. This circle being struck through could be symbolic of a rejection of peace, thus the wrathful scene depicted here. The green ancient in this plate does not appear to be as noteworthy, but I would like to focus on their arms. Their arms appear to be clothed in a bright green fur, and on their left arm we can see a gold mechanical structure which looks to be a sort of exoskeleton, with joints at the shoulder, elbow, and wrist. The hand also seems to be mechanical, with a dull gray color and strange lines across it. While it's possible all this is purely ornamental, it's also possible that this is an example of a prosthetic hand or arm. The second plate depicts 2 figures, also in profile. They're engaging in intercourse, and the karma symbol is held in their clasped hands, thus this scene's interpretation as depicting lust, desire, or love. The orange aureole surrounding them stands out from the dark reddish and teal background, filling in the negative space left by the scene. Given the subject matter, it's safe to say that these figures are mostly nude. Even still, they appear androgynous. Focusing mostly on the upper figure, they appear thin, with only the suggestion of muscle, and more emphasis placed on the curve of the stomach than the chest. This could represent androgynous standards of beauty, or it could allude to the fluidity of the ancients' genders. It's possible that, each time the ancients reincarnated, their gender could change, or they simply changed their genders if they pleased as an avenue of spiritual exploration. We see one ancient described as mother, father, and spouse, spiritual explorer, and honorary member of the Congregation of Balanced Ambiguity. These figures also seem to display some bird-like characteristics. Both figures' masks are pointed and beak-like, with the upper figures having a crest of what looks to be blue and white feathers. The lower figure's feet are curled into a talon-like shape, and their hands, what I'm choosing to call their hands at least, are elongated and paddle-like, reminiscent of the wings of active soaring birds such as albatross, which are carried by wind currents and do not need to flap to stay aloft. This is the first instance we see of these sorts of bird-like features, and I'll discuss them more in depth once we've seen more examples of this. The third plate is the most ambiguous of the 5, and it's the only one I need to turn to other sources to define. It depicts 2 ancients, again in profile, kneeling to face each other. Their background arms are clasped and a canister sits between them. The figure on the right reaches down to the canister, while the figure on the left reaches up and holds a lantern, which displays the Karma 3 symbol. Looking solely at the plate, this scene can have many interpretations. The figures are dressed lavishly, and the canister could be a trade agreement, so this could depict materialism. The left-hand figure carries scrolls and holds a lantern, a common symbol for guidance, so this could depict mentorship. Both figures are equally lavish, and neither appears of distinctly higher status than the other, so this could simply depict companionship. Examining the other places this symbol appears, it seems to be a combination of the latter two. This symbol, alongside the symbol for harmony, represents the friend. Alongside love, it represents the mother. In any case, the symbol clearly represents companions, and interpretation of the dynamic between those companions is likely dependent on context. The canister between the figures is likely some form of contract, as it displays indecipherable writing and the Karma 3 symbol. A possible interpretation is that this signifies acceptance of mentorship, or it could be an acceptance into one of the many houses of ancient culture. We know very little about these houses, such as the House of Braids or the House of Six Wagons. It's possible these were families, making the contract a sort of marriage license or adoption paper. And it's also possible they were factions or guilds of a sort. It's likely that they were a combination of the two, as an ancient is boasted as being of pure braid heritage, referring to the House of Braids, alluding to the fact that members of a house might be able to join or leave, thus making the original pure heritage more valuable or noteworthy. The left-hand figure in this scene is also quite bird-like, similar to the figures in the previous plate. Their feet are clawed and wrapped in bandages, and it appears that each foot has 2 toes. The claw-like nature is much clearer than in the previous plate. Here, it seems that the feet are shaped and bent to curl in on themselves, akin to how a bird's feet naturally rest in a grasping position to help them hold on to tree branches. The figure's mask is beak-like, the shape reminiscent of a turkey's. Ornamental rods stick out the back, in a crest similar to the crest of feathers in the previous plate. The figure's arms are heavily bandaged as well, in a broad, club-like shape that appears to be bound together by golden tabs or tape. The arms aren't as extreme or blatantly bird-like as on the previous plate, but the shape is still reminiscent of broader, passive soaring wings. The features on the right-hand figure are much more unique. Their entire body seems to be covered in a pattern of black and red stripes, with red circles around the shoulder and knees. Only the hands, head, and feet are clothed. The feet by shoes, the head by a mask, and the hands by a pocket of cloth that does not appear to be a glove. These pockets appear to be too small to cover fingers, and perhaps the hand doesn't have fingers at all. In fact, thin golden rods appear to hover over and extend from the cloth, with circular joints that suggest articulation. These may serve as prosthetic fingers. The fingers on the lower hand appear to be stretched to grasp the canister, while the fingers on the upper hand appear to wrap around their companion's arm. If these are prosthetics, and not simply an aesthetic choice made by the individual, they suggest an extreme degree of technological advancement. While we know that the ancients built artificial intelligences and vast mechanical superstructures, we don't often get to see the more mundane side of their technological accomplishments. Other unique features of this figure are the small, nub-like tail, which is not seen anywhere else that I'm aware of, and the strange worm-like hair falling down their back. The strongest indicator that this is hair and not just a strange garment is a piece of graffiti found in the game called Gas Mask. It appears to be a stylized ancient laying on their side, with these same worm-like structures going directly from their head. Given the cartoonish style of the graffiti, it's possible that these worm-like structures were a way to depict hair. It could be a hairstyle unique to the ancients, or it could be a stylized way to depict hairstyles such as locks or braids. It's in contrast to a possible small bit of hair we see in the first plate, where the green figure seems to have grey hair peeking through the back of their mask, but it could just be that ancients' hair types and styles varied, like how ours do. The next plate is much more simplistic and clear in its design. It depicts a very fat ancient sitting in a broken lotus pose, facing frontally. Their head is turned to the side as they eat what looks like a rabbit on a skewer, and 2 vines of blue fruits frame them. The karma symbol is worn on a massive pendant hanging low over the figure's stomach. This plate very clearly depicts gluttony. The figure's skin seems to be decorated in reddish-orange geometric patterns, and they are clothed in a bright orange robe which seems visually similar to the ones Buddhist monks wear. The color orange, and by extension the orange robes, depict simplicity and the renouncing of earthly ties in Buddhism. That does not appear to be the case here. It seems very deliberately ironic, especially due to the broken lotus pose. The lotus pose is a meditative stance which symbolizes the path towards enlightenment, but as with all the plates, the figure depicted here likely doesn't want to reach enlightenment. Besides the robe, the figure seems to be mostly nude, as 4 white circles appear to be connected to their stomach. These are, honestly, a bit baffling. They look somewhat like nipples, but the placement is wrong to say the least. They could alternatively be the ports required for tubing, as seen in the first plate. If my theory that these tubes were meant to provide sustenance has a basis, then it could imply that this ancient chose to remove the tubing and consume food the traditional way, which they might have found more pleasant. This figure's limbs are also completely bound in bandages. While it's clear that they are able to use their hands, as they hold a skewer, the formless and floppy shapes of their feet and other hand look like they would severely limit the function of the limbs. Perhaps this represents the stereotypical laziness of a glutton, which can also be inferred from the figure's seated position in contrast to the kneeling, standing, or otherwise active poses depicted in the other plates. The fifth and final plate in the sequence is the most visually striking to me. It's almost perfectly symmetrical and very evenly balanced, depicting a figure kneeling facing front, holding up two curved shields at their sides to protect themselves from an onslaught of golden knives. This plate depicts self-preservation or ego, the shielding of oneself from outside attacks, either literal or metaphorical. Its color palette is incredibly striking. The background is a dark green, and an orange aureole perfectly encircles the figure. The figure's shields and clothing are also green and orange, and as contrasting colors, these two are quite striking. The figure itself is wrapped in red bandages, providing a vibrant focal point. The fifth karma symbol should be featured prominently on the forehead of this figure's mask, though since the mask was painted over, the symbol was as well. It is still visible, however, though faded, suggesting that the karma symbols could have been carved or otherwise embedded into the surface of the plates. The figure shares the bird-like features of many of the others. Their mask is very long and beak-like, and the cavities towards the base of the beak are reminiscent of the nasal cavities found on birds' skulls. It's impossible to tell with the face painted over, but this mask appears the most similar to a raven's skull. The figure's feet are taloned, likely with the same 2 toes on each foot as suggested by the gold plates on the tops of their feet. The hands also seem bound, but their shape is much more difficult to discern. The knives seen stabbing into the shields here appear to be made of the same golden metal as the rest of the figure's ornamentations. While I've been calling it gold, there's no real proof of this besides the color. Even still, that color is otherwise almost exclusively used to depict ornamentations. Even the spearhead in the first plate looks to be white or gray. This suggests that the attack depicted here may be metaphorical or symbolic. Having individually analyzed all 5 plates, several aspects stand out which ought to be analyzed as well. The prominent colors in these pieces are displayed in fairly consistent ways, which could display symbolic significance. Red and black are used to display passion. In the first plate, the left-hand wrathful figure is depicted in black and red. On the second plate, the upper figure's skin is black and both figures wear red. The figure in the fifth plate is bandaged in red, symbolizing their passion for their life. Green is depicted as symbolizing life. This may be low-hanging fruit, but it is fruit nonetheless. The right-hand figure in the first plate is depicted in green and white, which is a color associated with death in Chinese culture. The intertwining colors on their skin could represent loss of life. In the second plate, the lower figure's skin is green, which could symbolize the creation of life. The green shields and shirt of the figure in the fifth plate could represent the life they're seeking to protect. The wielding of green shields could represent that they're using experience they've gained throughout their life to shield themselves from attack. While orange is less common among these plates, it seems to appear in scenes of pleasure. The orange aureoles in the second and fifth plates are examples of this, where the bright color illuminates the background even if the emotion itself isn't strictly visible. In the second, it shows the pleasure the figures find in the act, and in the fifth, it shows the pleasure the figure finds in their life. The figure in the fourth plate is almost entirely orange, perhaps symbolizing that they only seek pleasure in their life, in this case in the form of food. Lastly, there are many commonalities between the strange features depicted on the figures. Given the high level of technological advancement in their society, and the fact that the majority of the figures wear bandages, perhaps it was possible or even common to surgically alter the self. Most of the alterations we see seem to take a bird-like form. In Buddhism and many other cultures, birds symbolize freedom, specifically freedom from bondage and suffering. Perhaps the ancients viewed birds in a similar way and sought to emulate the bird's freedom of flight, which could let them glide effortlessly to ascension. The 5 natural urges that these plates depict were core tenets by which the ancients lived. Though we can draw similarities between their culture and real cultures found throughout the world, many differences also arise, which makes analyzing the culture of the ancients much more difficult and much more speculative. Unlike in real life, there's very little concrete information to be found which hasn't already been found, so if we want to gain a better understanding, we must delve deeper into analyzing what little information we have. Even if the figures depicted are deities and not actual ancients, they show what might have been considered a normal or ideal in ancient society, which can help us paint a picture of this extinct civilization. While Rainworld may be just a video game, the care put into crafting this world is evident with every step you take, and I think it's worthwhile to analyze, even if just so the developers can laugh at the community they've inspired to concoct such wild theories. Thanks for watching. This was my first ever time making a video, so I hope I did well. Links to all the sources I used are in the description, including some really cool ones put together by Rainworld community members, so definitely check those out if you're curious. If you have any questions or criticism, feel free to let me know in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more of my take on Rainworld's lore, please let me know. This was a lot of fun to put together, and I'd like to do more in the future. But that's all from me today. Bye!